Welcome back to another reading of Taken Abroad.
I think we'll probably cover chapter 2 and 3. Chapter 3 is long, but chapter 2 is so short. Yeah. So like Paco said, welcome back. Let's get our YouTuber crap out of the way first. Make sure you like and subscribe. Paco is going to read our links.
YouTube is Paco Pete Pot Pies. Both Spotify and Rumble are Magnum Pot Pie. The Discord link will be in the description as well as all of these. And our Ko-Fi is ko-fi.com/PacoPeep. Like, subscribe, do a little dance.
Yeah, donations are appreciated but never required. We're saving up to get Paco a laptop for live streams. Any donations after that will be for the Naughty Adventure Fund. So, anyway, now that we got our YouTuber crap out of the way and we've wasted a full minute of this, let's get into this through the great American novel.
All right.
All right, chapter 2.
Aaron found himself at Fort Jackson, South Carolina. He looked around at the many other young men and women that, like himself, wanted to fight for their country. From the moment he got off the plane, he was to follow every order given to him. He was surprised to see that they had not waited until the following day to start demanding orders. He quickly realized that his life was no longer his own, and he had rules that he had to follow that were made by other people.
I like how Lauren was in the military. And I like how his character is just surprised that it's not like summer camp where they get there and they just have sort of a day to sort of dick around and get used to the place before they just ease into it. Like, he was in the service.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's just wishing they did macaroni art.
Well, Lauren might have been in a special unit. It's all worth it.
He spoke softly to himself.
This is my dream, and it's what I've wanted for a long time, even if I don't like being told what to do.
After a couple of weeks of day in and day out routine, things became much easier for him. Even taking orders and following them had become a thoughtless action. It seemed like time had flown by when finally his 9 weeks of basic training had ended, and he was already in his 5th week of technical training school. I can't believe this time has gone by so quickly, Aaron said to his mother, who was on the other end of the phone. Only another 6 weeks of tech school, and then I graduate, and I can come home for 2 weeks.
I'll be happy to see you again. I've missed you, Lauren. His mother began to cry as she said the last 3 words.
Mom, I know this is hard, but I have to tell you that after I come home for 2 weeks, I have to go to Fort Dix, New Jersey, for 2.5 months of training to go to Iraq. He waited a few long seconds for his mother to absorb the news. Are you all right, Mom? He asked.
I'm fine, son. I had a feeling that you were going to go over there from the beginning, so I've been preparing myself for it.
This is what I've wanted to do, Mom, and it makes me happy, he said to reassure his mother.
I know. I want you to know that I'm proud of you.
The words she said to him sank deep inside and brought a smile to his face. I have to go now, Mom. I'll see you in 6 weeks. I love you.
I love you too, son. Goodbye. Words that he has never heard from Mama Gwen. Mama Gwen's always like, yeah, well. Aaron hung the phone up and stood motionless as he thought about the words his mother had said to him as they penetrated deep through his thick skull. I'm proud of you. Her voice saying those words echoed in his head. He smiled at the phone and then turned and walked away. Fort Dix, New Jersey was an exciting place for Aaron as he learned the many ins and outs of what would take place in Iraq. It could only partially prepare him for the real thing, and he realized this from the beginning. He had a good visit when he went home for 2 weeks, but knew he made the right decision by joining the army when he had seen some of his friends still hanging around home and working at dead-end jobs, going nowhere with their lives. Well, thank God Lawrence avoided that. It made him feel good, knowing that what he was doing was important to many lives. Now he had to finish his training at Fort Dix so that he could move to Kuwait and then to Iraq, where he will begin fighting for what he believes in. Now, we didn't hear, like, he was at home for 2 weeks lording it over everyone around him. That would
Right.
be something you could have made a chapter out of, right?
Yes.
You know? And again, we don't know what he believes in.
Right.
He could be fighting for furry acceptance or something for all we know. Like he could be fighting for the right to wear his blue fox suit everywhere he wants to. We have no idea what he believes in. Just that somehow nebulously it involves 9/11.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He says nothing about having lost somebody, about how it affected him. Just that was it.
Yeah, not like his uncle died in the Twin Towers or his favorite teacher died at the Pentagon or none of that. It was just this is what I believe in. Yeah, because in Lawrence's world, everybody that joins the army wants to fight for what they believe in. Nobody joins the army, to be a computer technician or to get an education or something. It's because they want to get out there and start fighting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how it works. That's what Gomer Pyle wanted when he joined the USMC,
Yeah.
and he got a bucket on his head.
Chapter 3.
Aaron looked down at his watch as he stood beside his fellow soldiers, dressed in his BDUs, with his backpack securely fastened around him. 4:30 a.m. Iraqi time. This was it, he thought to himself. This is the moment I've waited so long and trained so hard for. He could feel his anxiety grow when he fell in behind his fellow soldiers to step aboard the plane that was to carry his unit of 51 soldiers into Iraq. His unit leader, Staff Sergeant Buchanan, was the last man to step aboard the plane before they closed the door and headed for the runway.
Aaron closed his eyes when he felt the airplane picking up speed. He could feel the bumps from the runway easily through the soles of his combat boots on the bottom of his feet.
He's going to stand all the way from New Jersey to Iraq?
I don't know.
Yeah,
But-
he's got this image from like a Vietnam War movie where like the soldiers are like standing in the plane or something.
Yeah.
Iraq's a long way away, Lauren. They probably let you sit down.
I'm just glad that the soles of his combat boots were actually on the bottom of his feet and not his hands.
Well, knowing Lauren, who knows?
Then he felt his body move at an uneven angle as the nose of the plane began to lift off the ground and speed into the air. He said a silent prayer for himself, his family, and for his fellow soldiers. He opened his eyes to find his unit leader, Staff Sergeant Buchanan, looking at him. He gave him a smile as his leader gave him a thumbs up for reassurance. He fidgeted with the excess strap from his backpack belt while a million things ran through his mind.
The flight to Iraq seemed to take forever. He wasn't sure he was prepared for what he was going to see when he got off the plane, but he knew there was nothing he could do about it now. Well, that's true.
Aaron felt his stomach suddenly turn very warm while he felt the plane begin to descend. In just moments, he would be landing in the country that would change his life forever. He felt the jolt of the plane as the tires touched the ground. His limbs went numb, and his stomach felt as if the food would come up at any time. He swallowed hard and beat the rising gorge back down into his stomach as the plane began to slow to a crawl. As he pulled the release handle on his seatbelt, he
Seatbelt.
repositioned himself to stretch and prepared to disembark from the plane. He had expected to hear a lot of noise and see explosions in the distance when he got his first glimpse of Iraq, but was happy to find it quiet in the dark early morning hours. He hadn't planned on it raining like it was, but He would be outside only long enough to go from the plane to the hangar anyway.
I'm too lazy to look it up. I wonder how much rain Iraq gets.
I don't know.
I mean, I've never been there. And like I said, I'm too lazy to look it up. But my vision of Iraq is desert.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't know. Maybe it rains a lot there, but I never had that mental image of getting off a plane in Iraq, in the pouring rain.
I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know, but I'm.
We're lazy.
Yeah, I'm not looking it up because I won't care when I'm done reading this. The unit had all entered the hangar and sat on the floor as directed by Staff Sergeant Buchanan after removing their backpacks. Aaron felt so they wore these backpacks all the way from New Jersey to Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But it's like an hour, right?
Yeah, it's a short flight. It's one of them commuter flights that probably doesn't even get up to cruising altitude. Aaron felt the concrete floor getting more and more uncomfortable after sitting through 2 hours of what the next 3 days' agenda would be. After the 2-hour lecture, the unit gathered up their backpacks and made their way to their bunks. Aaron located his bunk and began unpacking his gear. He had his gear all spread out over the bottom bunk when he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned around to find his friend, Staff Sergeant Paul Pabla, there with a smile on his face and his index finger pointing to the top bunk, indicating to Aaron that the bottom bunk was his. No way, Aaron said with a smile spreading across his face.
Oh, yes way, Paul replied, grinning back at him. Rank has its privileges, you know, he said as he smiled and patted Aaron on the back.
Well, I guess I can be thankful for a good bunk mate anyway, Aaron stated. Once he gathered up his things from the bottom bunk, he placed them on the top bunk. He realized he wasn't at all upset about sharing the bunk with Paul. In fact, he was quite happy about it. He just couldn't believe that out of all the guys in the unit he could have gotten forced to share a bunk with, he was lucky enough to gotten one of his good friends.
Over the next 3 days, Aaron and Paul spent their time getting to know the base and the areas that surrounded it. They distributed ammunition throughout the base and took the necessary classes they needed for out in the field. The 4th day, Aaron and Paul and a couple other guys they worked with drove a Humvee into the city to get to know the area there. Aaron drove especially slow because he was also looking around at all the new sights. They were pointing out places that have been bombed and gunfights had taken place between the American soldiers and the insurgents. They noticed that this particular area of the city was almost deserted because of all the damage that had been done to the buildings. There were people still there, but not many that hung about in the streets.
Aaron quickly slammed on the brakes when a man ran out in front of the Humvee and stood there blocking its path. He couldn't figure out why the man would want to run out in front of a moving vehicle, especially one as large as a Humvee. Aaron sat there and looked at the man for what felt like 20 minutes, but in reality was nothing more than mere seconds. The man had short black hair with a long beard, an athletic build, and was about 5 feet 9 inches tall, wearing torn brown pants and a white long-sleeve shirt. We don't know what Aaron looks like, but we know what this guy looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Aaron looked over at Paul when they suddenly realized that this guy was a suicide bomber. All 4 men in the Humvee ducked down just in time as the man in the road blew himself into pieces. After the explosion, all 4 men sat up, looked at each other with a sigh of relief that they were still alive. "No, I can't believe that just happened," Aaron said.
We better call the base and let them know what happened, Paul stated. We'll have to cordon off the area until the police get the mess cleaned up.
Never mind to just watch a man blow himself to bits. Let's get this mess cleaned up and get on out the road here. I'm hungry.
Yeah.
They called into the base to inform them of the suicide bomber and that it killed no one else but the bomber itself. Then they got out of the Humvee to rope off the area. When Aaron stepped out, he grew pale at the sight of the human flesh that had been stuck to the vehicle and building walls around him. Did the guy have it inside him? Like Mr. Bean painting his. As he took his first step after closing the door of the Humvee, he felt an odd feeling under his left boot that felt like he'd stepped on a thin carpet. He lifted his foot to find a piece of human scalp stuck to the bottom of his boot. That did it for him. "Oh, God!" he exclaimed as he pulled the scalp from his boot, turned, and lost his breakfast in the middle of the street. Paul ran to his side.
Are you all right, Aaron?
"Yeah," he answered. There's just some things that not even the army can't prepare a person for, I guess."
That was one thing that none of us was prepared for, Paul answered. Let's get this area roped off before anyone else steps into a mess.
Sorry.
This is like I don't even know what this is. Like, this is out of like out of Stripes or something. Like, good Lord.
The next couple of nights, Aaron found it hard to sleep and hard to concentrate on his work during the day. He and Paul had both stayed up talking about the incident of the suicide bomber on the third night. It seemed to help them both face what had happened, and they both were able to sleep better.
Which one's the big spoon? Which one's the little spoon?
I don't know.
Yeah.
From that time on, whenever they found something that was bothering them enough that they couldn't sleep or couldn't concentrate on their work, they would talk to each other so they could get it out of their system and not have to keep it bottled up inside.
Over the next month, Aaron and Paul attended many training classes on how to react to IEDs, improvised explosive device, how to close off specific areas after bombings and raid, how to raid houses, and how to train Iraqi police. These guys are mechanics, I thought. He kept busy, so there wasn't much time for a lot of recreation. In his off time, Aaron would get on the computer and talk to his mother or call her on the phone. If he and Staff Sergeant Pablo?
Yeah?
Yeah, it says Pablo, but...
Paul Pablo, I think it was.
Yeah, but wasn't it Pablo?
I don't think so. Pablo. Yeah.
Yeah. At times they would get in a game of basketball or play a couple video games. During the first month, there was a couple of rounds of mortar that hit the base that Aaron and Paul had to clean up. He was never bored, but always wished he could be in a little more of the action. Little more of the action? He's taking mortar fire. He's getting suicide bombers. He's like training the Iraqi police. He's raiding houses. What more action does he want?
I don't.
Does he want to be in the jungle fighting the predator? Good Lord.
Maybe.
Yeah. Do you think we'll ever see more of the action than what we're seeing here, Paul? Aaron asked.
Yes, I do, Paul replied. And from what I've been hearing, it's not going to be long before we do.
Aaron gave Paul a stunned but enthusiastic look after this comment. I wonder what that looks like.
I don't know.
What have you heard? He asked as he leaned in closer to make sure he didn't miss a word of what Paul is about to tell him.
Well, from what Staff Sergeant Buchanan was telling me, the Marines are pushing a group of insurgents towards the outskirts of Mosul, and we have to help corner them. We're going to be right in the middle of the action to repair any vehicles that break down and are expected to fight if necessary. So we'll have to go in with our weapons ready to fire.
When is this all supposed to happen? Aaron asked with anxiousness.
Within the week,
Paul replied with a slight grin, knowing how much Aaron has wanted to be in with the fighting.
Have they made up teams yet? Aaron asked, pushing to learn more of the situation.
yes, you and me are on a team with Private Baker and Private Gentry, Paul answered.
Do Baker and Gentry know about this yet?
No, I just found out about it this morning. I was supposed to wait until this evening to inform you all about it at the same time, so if anyone asks, you don't know anything about it yet.
Aaron looked at his friend as for, all right. And then, knowing Lorne, he told everybody. The rest of the day, he did his best to keep his mind on his work, though it wasn't easy. That night, he lay in his bunk, thinking about being in the middle of the action. It took him a couple of hours to get to sleep. Over the next few days, his excitement grew more and more as he waited anxiously for word from the Marines had pushed the insurgents to the point where the army was now needed to help corner them. Paul could see Aaron's anxiety as he approached him. He'd been seeing it over the last few days.
I know you've been anxious for word for us to go out into the action, Aaron. I just wish I could share your enthusiasm.
Paul watched Aaron's shoulders fall, because Aaron was hoping he was coming with word about the insurgents. Paul hesitated as he saw Aaron sigh, then watched a smile appear on Aaron's face when he blurted out,
We have to be packed and ready to leave in 1 hour. We're also changing our position, too.
Aaron gave Paul a dumbfounded look as he asked, What do you mean, changing our positions?
We're not going in to work on vehicles. We're going in to fight, Paul explained.
But they're mechanics.
Yes.
Well, I guess they're jack of all trades. I guess in Lorne's world, you aren't specialized in anything. Soldiers might be repairing Humvees 1 minute and like, shooting at insurgents the next and training Iraqi soldiers the day after, I guess. We're not gonna... Oh, I'm sorry. I almost read Paul's part. I'm sorry. I'm sorry if that broke anyone's immersion. What made them change our position? Aaron asked.
The insurgents kidnapped a taxi driver and are threatening to kill him if their demands are not met.
Paul shifted gears in his voice and tried to hide his nervousness.
Let's get this stuff ready. I still have to inform Baker and Gentry.
Still hasn't told him? Aaron began loading ammunition into the Humvee while Paul fetched Baker and Gentry. When they returned, the four of them had the vehicle loaded and ready to move out in 40 minutes.
Okay, men, who wants to drive?
Aaron stepped forward. No, I'll drive, Chuck.
Okay, let's go then.
They all piled into the vehicle. Aaron in the driver's seat, Paul riding shotgun with Gentry and Baker in the back.
We have to go to the police station first to let the Iraqi police know that we're here to help them, Paul explained.
Aaron, you can read.
Aaron pulled into the parking lot of the police station and parked near the entrance door. He turned the engine off and noted the shabby look the building held. All four of the men got out and walked toward the building. Upon entering it, they had to stand still for a moment to let their eyes adjust to the dimly lit room. They found the translator standing next to the clerk's desk. The man held out his hand to greet the soldiers.
Hi, I'm Staff Sergeant Pabla. I need to let the police know that we're here to help them.
The translator was an American, Paul could tell. He felt relieved that it would be easy to communicate with police with the translator present.
My name is Staff Sergeant Randolph. Hold on right here. I'll let the police chief know. Paul and Aaron stood watching the sergeant as he left the room. Is everybody a staff sergeant?
Looks like it, except for Lorne.
Yeah.
Oh, and Baker and Gentry. They're just privates.
Yeah. Let's see. Paul and Aaron stood watching the sergeant as he left the room and made his way down the narrow hall. Before he could return, they heard gunfire coming from nearby. Paul, Aaron, Baker, and Gentry rushed outside. They reached the Humvee just in time to dodge a bullet that ricocheted off the police station. They couldn't fire back until they found out which direction the shots were coming from. Then another bullet hit the police station close to the Humvee this time. Are they trying to hit the Humvee? Aaron asked himself. His question was answered as the next bullet twanged off the back of the Humvee. Well, Humvees are so small, it's hard to hit them.
Yeah.
They're shooting from between those two buildings over there,
Paul shouted as he pointed to the buildings across the street.
Aaron, go behind that concrete barrier on the right side of the police station and shoot! Baker, you go to that concrete barrier on the left side of the police station and shoot! Me and Gentry will stay here and shoot from both sides of the Humvee, Paul ordered.
Thank God he told them that they need to shoot. I was worried that he would forget and they would sit around and just wait.
Well, I figured Lauren was probably pissing himself. Aaron and Baker both ran to their designated positions and began to fire back at the insurgents. Paul and Gentry began firing back also from the sides of the Humvee. The insurgents must have been overwhelmed by the firepower of the four men because the shooting ceased after only 5 minutes. Once Paul felt it was all safe enough, they went back into the police station and were updated that the kidnapped taxi driver had been killed and that they needed to find the man's body. After a few minutes of deliberation, the four men headed back out to the Humvee and climbed in. They drove around the block to make sure the insurgents were gone. Then they cordoned off the area and began a search for the taxi driver's body. Aaron and Paul walked towards the 2 buildings and began searching, while Baker and Gentry began walking in the opposite direction to start searching.
they had to deliberate.
Yeah.
And that was important.
Maybe they realized they're in a dumb book.
Keep your eyes sharp, Paul said to Aaron. You never know if or where an insurgent could be hiding.
Aaron could feel his adrenaline picking up as he inched towards the back of the building where the insurgents had been shooting from. He inched his head around the corner to take a cautious look. Paul's notion that the insurgents had left was right on the money, Aaron found as he looked down at the body laying motionless on the ground behind the building. Aaron and Paul walked up to the man with caution, checking for any bombs that the insurgents may have left on the body as a booby trap. To their relief, there was none. They looked down at the lifeless body of the taxi driver. Not an old man, Aaron said to Paul. Late 20s or early 30s, maybe. Then Aaron looked down at the hands tied behind the man's back and his ankle tied crisscrossed. He moved his eyes back to the man's face that lay with one cheek flat against the dirt, and he saw the bullet hole between the man's eyes, just above the brows. The man had been killed execution style. A tear appeared from Aaron's eye as his face grew pale. He felt a great pain for the man that had been carelessly murdered.
Paul put his hand on Aaron's shoulder. Let's call it in that we found the man's body, so they can give him a proper burial as soon as possible. Aaron wiped the tear from his eye, and then turned to Paul to radio Baker and Gentry that they had found the body and to meet them back at the police station.
After letting the police know that they had located the body, Aaron, Paul, Baker, and Gentry piled back into the Humvee and headed back to the base. Paul and Aaron held quiet up front as Baker and Gentry drew a short, chopped-up conversation between the two of them on the ride back. Paul and Aaron knew that they should probably spend a couple hours talking to each other about their feelings and what they had seen and been through that day, but neither could find the words to begin talking about it, so they both just lay silently, staring into the dark. Weren't they in the car?
They had been, but now they're in bed. Keep up.
But
They
they didn't get back to the base. They were riding back to the base. The guys are in the back, gossiping about boys or whatever. And then next thing you know, they're staring into the dark, just feeling their feelings.
This is a man who suddenly appeared at the fort for training. Like, pow. I'm still finding it funny that they know that the taxi driver has been killed. Somehow.
Well, I mean, he did have a bullet hole in his head.
They were told that before they were told to go find the body.
Oh, that is true, yeah. That is true.
But they had no idea where to find the man.
Yeah.
And where are the Marines in this?
They went home.
Apparently. They're just like, oh, he's dead. Let's not even tell them where the body is. They just shrug and leave.
We shouldn't be making fun of this. Where the fuck's your book? I haven't read your book.
Mine is not completed yet.
Yeah. Alright, so anyway.
There's going to be a lot of man love.
Well, there's going to be man love in this.
I'm ripping off of Lorne.
Yeah. It was about 1 a.m. when Aaron had finally drifted off to sleep. He was having trouble all night as he tossed and turned and finally woke up around 4 a.m. in a cold sweat from the nightmare he had been having. He laid there deep in thought and motionless as a tear rolled down his cheek. It took another hour before he fell back to sleep. It was 8 a.m. when he finally woke up. He was late for work, but Paul had left a note on his bed explaining to him that he knew he had a hard time sleeping and that he didn't wake him up for work because he knew that he needed rest, because that is how the army works.
Yes.
You tossed and turned all night last night. Get showered and dressed and come into work when you wake up.
The note read.
Well, shoot, I'd just roll back over, man. I'd be getting there at noon.
Yeah. Aaron pushed the thoughts of the previous day's events out of his head the best he could and climbed off his bunk. He gathered up his things and moved to the shower to wash the night of sleep away and thoughtlessly slid into his uniform. He tossed his cap on his head and walked out the door and walked to the mess hall to get some assistance from a cup of coffee and a biscuit for some energy. The next week and a half was all repetition. Go to work, then bed. All the while, Aaron still had thoughts of the taxi driver. The images of his lifeless body laying there in front of him haunted Aaron every night in his dreams. He had called home and talked to his mom and let her know some of the events that had taken place and to reassure her that he was all right. Even though he tried to disguise the tone in his voice so that his mom couldn't see how much he was bothered by the things he had seen, he still got the feeling that she could tell he had changed from the last time she had talked to him. Aaron hung up the phone feeling better after talking to his mother. Somehow, hearing her voice had restored a comforting feeling that was lost at the sight of the dead taxi driver.
3 weeks had gone by since the shootout of the insurgents at the police station. Paul walked over to Aaron with a look on his face that told Aaron something was up. Where do we have to go? Aaron asked Paul before Paul even got a word out.
We have to go to the Iraqi police station again, Paul replied.
What's going on this time? He asked.
Nothing. We're going to be training them.
Paul looked at Aaron and noted the sigh of relief and also a hint of regret on his face.
They left and gathered up Baker, Gentry, and Jerry Bowler, a worker from the refueling unit, because they needed an extra man, and left the Humvee for the Iraqi police station. As they approached the police station, Aaron looked at the building to his left, where he had found the taxi driver. Will I ever get that image out of my mind? He asked himself. He was able to move the thought from his head for most of the day as they were training the Iraqi police. After 10 hours of training, Aaron was ready to go back to the base and lay his head on his pillow for a long night of rest.
On the way back to the base, the guys were laughing and discussing the day's events of training the Iraqi policemen. The ride was quiet and smooth, and Aaron slouched easily back against his seat while Paul drove along. He closed his eyes and took in the conversation, and put his remarks in when he needed to. He could feel himself begin to fall asleep, so he quickly sat up and rubbed his eyes back into focus and looked at the road ahead. Just as he got focused, an explosion threw the Humvee sideways, and Paul slammed on the brakes as he was now placed in the opposite lane.
Is everyone all right?
Paul asked. He looked at Aaron to his right and saw he was fine, and then turned around to check on Baker, Gentry, and Bowler. Jerry had his hand over his ears and was slightly bent over in the seat.
Jerry, are you all right?
Paul asked.
Jerry,
he repeated.
Jerry still didn't reply. Aaron turned around and grabbed Jerry's hands to pull them away from his ears. As he lifted his left hand from Jerry's ear, he saw a small stream of blood roll down Jerry's earlobe from inside his ear. We need to get him to the hospital now, Aaron said to Paul.
Paul took his foot off the brake and stepped down heavily on the accelerator.
I think we should all get checked out while we're there, he stated.
Aaron looked at the confused look on Jerry's face. He could tell that Jerry couldn't hear anything, but admired the way he remained calm. At the hospital, everyone checked out all right except Jerry. The doctor informed Paul, Aaron, Baker, and Gentry that Jerry's eardrums had been blown out from the explosion, and he would have to remain at the hospital. They all went to their bunks and prayed that night for Jerry to recover, and thanked God that nobody got killed in the explosion.
The next few months went by quickly, and Aaron thought less and less about the incident with the taxi driver. Although it still remained in his mind, he was able to deal with it easier than he had when it first happened. I find it funny that he's having such a hard time with this, but not the guy that blew himself up that he stepped on his scalp.
Yeah, that didn't bother him because that was just, nameless fodder. But, this taxi driver.
Did he ever have a ride with his taxi driver? Did he know him?
Maybe they had an affair. Who knows?
I'm sorry.
Okay. Okay.
Although it still remained in his mind, he was able to deal with it easier than he had when it first happened. He had a hard time when he had to say goodbye to Jerry. Although he still had his life, thank God, he would never be able to hear again because of the explosion that took his eardrums.
And, he never explains why this one guy blew out both his eardrums in the explosion, but the other 4 guys didn't. Were they all wearing hearing protection, but he wasn't? It's just no explanation.
Did he just have fragile eardrums?
Yeah, and months casually passed by.
Yeah.
In this. Aaron spent most of his time with Paul, even when they weren't working and training the Iraqi police. He's been training the Iraqi police for months.
Yeah.
They grew very close, and Aaron was happy he had someone he could confide in when he was having a hard time. He couldn't imagine how much harder his time in Iraq would have been if it weren't for Paul. Couldn't imagine how much harder his time in Iraq would have been if he didn't have Paul there with him.
Aaron would call his mother about once every 2 weeks, along with write her letters to let her know he was all right and to update her on everything that was going on. He let her know that even though he was proud of the things they were doing to help the Iraqi people, he had a hard time dealing with some of the things he'd seen happen and had been through.
Things aren't at all what I'd pictured in my head when I joined up, Mom, he'd say. Most of the time, his thoughts would drift back to the suicide bomber and the taxi driver.
Oh, well, there we go.
There you go. There had been much more since then, but for some uncertain reason, he would still think back to those 2 incidents. Maybe it was because they were the first things of this nature he'd ever witnessed in his innocent life. His mom let him know that she could tell that things had changed just by talking on the phone. How can you tell just by talking to me on the phone? He asked. I'm your mother, and it's my job to know these things, she replied.
As much as he tried to hide his feelings, she still knew. He was always amazed at the insight his mother had into his life. Paul would always tell Aaron, if it weren't for mothers, this world would be a hard place to live in.
I think it would be damn near impossible. So that's chapters 2 and 3 down. So we're clipping right through this thing. So the great American novel here, man.
Yeah, I feel bad that I haven't really started working on mine.
Well, I mean, I guess you need something like this to give you inspiration.
Yeah, right.
It is interesting that he chose to write about the Army. He was in the Air Force. I mean, it's not like he went to Iraq or anything, but it's just interesting that he wouldn't choose to write about the Air Force.
That he knew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So interesting.
Anyway, see you soon for chapter 4. Kiss, kiss.